Evolution is one of the concepts that man uses either by itself or in concurrence with other theories to explain themselves. Why are we here? How did we get here? And how is it that I am in this body, in this place, in this time with all this stuff around? Okay? Well, some people believe that over a large period of time, that characteristics in physical beings change for a variety of reasons, to either adapt to their environment or to make life easier. Okay. Other people believe that the creator being just snapped his fingers and here we are, right? Well, I don't necessarily think that either of those are true in the ways they're presented, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some combination of both of those concepts going on at the same time, okay? What is evolution? Okay. Change in characteristics over time. Now, this is pretty broad, but at the same time, it pretty much covers it, right? I mean, that's a huge concept, changing characteristics over time. Okay? That seems reasonable. It also seems reasonable to me that God, the Creator, created the framework through which humans operate and express themselves, which means that how we act, how we express ourselves, and our creations are subjected to law, okay? So I don't feel that the Creator just snapped her fingers and here we are. I feel that the Creator created this place and the human soul, a playground for which her children can play, and then humans, over a very long period of time, have essentially bred various emotional injuries into themselves, like dogs, in a sense, right? Like, it's kind of what countries are, like massive inbreeding programs for humans, okay? And these particular emotional injuries get compounded, and it becomes very difficult for us to recognize our own errors. We start to think that our own errors that have been building from our ancestors are actually a part of our spiritual development. Well, they are changing characteristics over time, right? Like, if what I just presented is just true, then that would mean that evolution exists, right? Let's take a look at some of man's view of evolution, changing characteristics over time. And then we'll compare that with God's view of, again, lovingly changing characteristics over time. What would that look like? Well, a big part of man's view of evolution is this concept of survival of the fittest. That means that the biggest, strongest, or most technologically advanced of any particular species is able to hoard resources and procreate the most, right? Like, people love to talk about this idea of, like, the big caveman or the big warlord that gets to have sex with all the women, and then all the men have to work, right? Is that really all that different than what's going on right now? That kind of behavior, that kind of thinking, survival of the fittest, you know? My gun is bigger than your gun, so I'm going to come by and take all your stuff. That rewards violence. course, violence is extreme anger, right? And anger covers terror and grief. So, actually, if you're just looking at these two by that definition, then that means that the so-called most evolved have the most amount of sadness inside of themselves. Because they have the strongest addictions of inflicting their worldview that they should be at the top ruling this place on everybody else. We know this to be true. We know they have a huge amount of terror because of the systems that humans have set up to run this place. Because they all operate on scarcity principles. There's never going to be enough. So we need to fight each other in order to, what do people say? Take care of their family. I'll go join the military and become a state-sponsored murderer so that I can take care of my family. In the United States, the largest amount of disposable income that the government takes in goes to funding weapons and tools of destruction in the so-called defense industry. That shows that that is our government's, that is our state's priority. Their priority is violence and warfare. And then we individually take that on and we agree with that. So we incentivize industries and culture that reward violence. The scarcity principle thing. The elite families that run the banking industry in this place, go grab a $1 bill and turn it over and look at it. You think the all-seeing eye is God? God doesn't need an eye. That's man attempting to intimidate other man through fear. That's terroristic behavior. Manipulating a person's behavior, leveraging their behavior through fear. That's terrorism. Okay? Trickle down just enough so that all of you can sustain yourselves at a base level and that you can work in ways that they want you to work, in ways that serve them. Ultimately, engaging in this kind of behavior desensitizes us, okay? We become insensitive, or we become more dense. And this makes sense, right? Because what are people doing when they're engaging in physical sensations? They have to bludgeon their senses in order to feel anything. Because we're so dense. Because we subscribe to survival of the fittest, which rewards violence and operates on scarcity principles. Now, this is a kind of evolution, right? But guess what kind? Human into a human that is in a dark condition, also known as a demon. How about God's view of evolution? How would that be different? Well, to start, God's view is that life builds in complexity and beauty off of itself. Doesn't that make sense? If you're a parent, theoretically, don't you want to create the most loving environment for your child to thrive in so that they can explore and operate and express themselves lovingly? If the environment is harsh and barren, they need to worry about just surviving, let alone expressing themselves in a loving way. So there's a book called 1491 that talks about some of the goings-ons in the North and South American continent pre-European exploration, okay? Pre-Columbus. There's a section of, okay, so there's new archaeological evidence to suggest that there are far more people here than we want to admit there was. And then also these people were actually in a more loving state than we were in certain circumstances because they knew how to lovingly tend and manage the land. Complicated land systems that provided bountiful food and clean water for the residents of these pre-Columbian, civilizations. There's a spot in the Amazon in Brazil called Terra Preta. I encourage you to look it up. When taking aerial photographs, they see that the soil of Terra Preta is black and that there are right angles that separate the black soil from the brown soil, which would suggest that humans had a role in creating it, right? When they tested the soil, they found that it was made of 40% carbon. Normal soil maybe has 1 or 2% carbon in it. What does carbon do? Carbon isn't an amendment. Carbon doesn't help the plants. Well, there's some YouTube videos where they're in Terra Preta, and there's a fellow that points to a giant orange tree, maybe 25 feet tall, full of fruit. And the guy says in Portuguese, that tree is 2 years old and it's full of fruit. How can that be? Impossible, right? No. The carbon doesn't degrade. It doesn't break down. It takes 2,000 years to break solid carbon down. And because it is a stable structure, molecules and microbial life can stick to the insides of these carbon atoms and build colonies off of themselves, okay? To create a fungal-dominated microbiome where fungal life works in conjunction with the plant life to facilitate nutrient flow. Okay? Plant over here says, I could use this, this, and this. Fungi over here says, no problem. I'll make it, send it right over. Plants and microorganisms have the ability to share resources with each other. Okay? It is magic. We don't have to do anything except put the carbon in the ground where it belongs. And yet, so-called primitive, savage people were able to figure this out, and we're still walking around spraying glyphosate Roundup on our food. That's what we're doing. That is an example of how life builds in complexity and beauty off of itself. This here, this is man's concept. The Amazon The Amazon is a human-designed food forest on an epic scale. And we're destroying it. This rewards loving behavior. Okay? Patience. And chilling. And being in communication with what's around you. The plants will talk to you. You'll know what to do. When you start receiving God's love, you just know. I do this, I do this, I do this. Okay? And then it all works together. This stuff's called biochar. Okay? Solid carbon. How do you make it? The simplest thing in the world. All you do is you burn organic material in an oxygen-depleted environment. That's it. There's no slash and burn. Okay? There's no forest fires on purpose. Now, they take the wood down, they put it in pits in the ground, light it on fire, let it smolder. No oxygen changes the chemical composition of what happens. Okay? Different gases are released. Actually, less harmful gases are released. You're left with solid carbon, you smash it up, the carbon goes in the ground, not in the atmosphere. And you actually have American politicians creating the argument that because there's more carbon in the atmosphere, that it makes a more hospitable environment for plants to thrive. Two-year-old orange tree, 25 feet tall, full fruit. Sounds like abundance to me. Sounds like more than enough for everyone. Without even have to doing any work. We set up systems that run themselves. That's abundance principles. One tomato has hundreds of seeds, which could produce hundreds of plants, which could produce hundreds of fruits. Yeah, hundreds of fruits on one tomato plant. It's possible. Use your imagination. This is where we need to use our will power to expand our imagination. To even start to conceptualize what is possible as we start to work through our emotions to feel God's love, and then we become more intelligent. And then we know the truth. Her truth. Amazon rainforest was a human-designed food forest. We become lighter, and we increase our sensitivity. Okay? That's God's view of evolution. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Okay? Personal story here. I have a bunch of fruit trees. By the way, I'm attempting to do this on my property. I'm attempting to build a microbiome and get some fruit trees going and grow my own food and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Now, I bought a bunch of fruit trees, and I had this lime tree that was like a stick at the time. And it had a little blossom on it. Okay? Now, I had just gone through a 3-day fast. And I was back on food 2 days, but I was eating mostly raw foods. Okay? So, I was very sensitive. And my body was pretty clean. Okay? I noticed that this little lime tree, its blossom starts to open. Okay? And I get so excited. This is my first fruit tree blossom ever. And so I get up to it, and I stick my nose right up against it and take it in. And this wave, whoom, whoom, of emotion flooded over me. And I started crying. Uncontrollably. I had no idea why. But I just let it happen, right? I didn't get wrapped up in my intellect. I'm enjoying the experience. I smell this flower. I'm having an overwhelming emotional experience. All of a sudden, I no longer feel the desire to cry anymore. I start laughing uncontrollably. I allow myself to collapse on the ground, and I laugh, giggling, rolling around the ground uncontrollably for like 4 minutes. I got high from smelling a flower. When you consider that that is possible, the design of this place starts to make more sense. Like, I used to think that flowers were useless because I was too dense and insensitive to have that kind of experience. Now imagine if we're all walking around very sensitive and there's flowers everywhere. We would be feeling joy and bliss and pleasure all the time if we were all in a sensitive enough state to experience it. Why would you want to go to work to buy a bunch of stuff to satisfy your addictions when you could feel true joy from going outside, sitting on the ground, smelling a flower? The answer is you wouldn't. And the dark humans that run this place know that's possible. And that's part of scarcity principles, okay? Scare, I mean, it's in the word, scare. They're scaring you. As opposed to abundance, enough for everybody, all the time. Okay. Now, all that being said, there's another kind of evolution available to us, where we go from what we are into something greater than what we ever imagined we could be. In God's view, we can change our characteristics over time to become a celestial being. More beautiful and more complex than a perfect human. It's available to everybody. And available right now in the physical. Can you imagine if we had actual celestial people walking around in the physical? You get a couple of people that do this. You wouldn't need that many people to have a massive impact. And the first few people that attempt to do this, they are going to get the heaviest spirit attack. But the more people that do this in the physical plane, the easier it becomes. Yeah. All right, well, I encourage you to play around with these ideas, okay? Don't be afraid to challenge your views. But most importantly, don't trust me. Experiment for yourself. Love and peace, friends.